In the depths of space, where empires rise and fall like dying stars, humanity has earned a reputation that sends shivers through alien spines. Not for our weapons, though they are formidable. Not for our technology, though it rivals the ancient races. No, what truly terrifies the galaxy is our unpredictability. Other species follow rigid codes, predictable patterns, evolutionary imperatives carved in genetic stone. But humans? Humans will sacrifice everything for a stranger's child. They'll declare war over a perceived injustice. They'll risk their lives for creatures they've never met, simply because it's the right thing to do. The Galactic Council has spent centuries trying to understand this phenomenon they call human irrationality syndrome. They've failed. How do you quantify compassion? How do you measure the worth of a soul? Captain Sarah Chun thought she understood the galaxy's fear of her species. She'd seen humans do impossible things driven by emotion, watch her own kind defy logic for the sake of principle. But she had no idea that offering a bowl of soup to a dying alien child would trigger a chain of events that would reshape the balance of power across 7-star systems. Some acts of kindness echo through eternity. Some moments of compassion ignite wars. And sometimes the simple act of feeding the hungry becomes the spark that burns down an empire built on cruelty. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became its most terrifying strength. Captain Sarah Chin's boots clicked against the grimy metal deck of Nexus Station as she navigated through the sprawling marketplace that dominated Level 7. The air hung thick with a mingled sense of exotic spices, ozone from overworked atmosphere processors, and the underlying mustiness that came from housing too many different species in one confined space. Overhead, holographic advertisements flickered in 17 different languages, their neon glow casting rainbow shadows across the faces of merchants hawking everything from Andromedan silk to Terran coffee beans. Sarah had been trading the Outer Rim routes for 8 years now, ever since she'd scraped together enough credits to buy the aging cargo hauler she'd christened Defiant Dream. Her ship wasn't much to look at: scarred hull plating, jury-rigged engine mounts, and a hyperdrive that wheezed like an asthmatic Bronson. But it was hers. More importantly, it was fast enough to outrun most pirates and reliable enough to keep her alive in the void between stars. Today's cargo manifest included medical supplies bound for the Kepler colony, luxury foods for the corporate executives on Titan Base, and a small but lucrative shipment of Earth-grown coffee that would fetch premium prices in the outer systems. It was routine work, the kind of milk runs that paid the bills and kept fuel in her tanks. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, exactly the way she liked it. The merchant quarter buzzed with its usual chaotic energy. Tall, reed-thin Altarians gestured elegantly with four-fingered hands as they negotiated prices for their biotech products. Short, stocky Krellians thumped their massive fists on counters, their crystalline skin refracting the station's lighting into prismatic displays. A group of ethereal Vashti floated past, their translucent forms barely visible except for the soft blue glow that emanated from their core organs. Sarah paused at Jorik's stall, where the gruff Bronthon merchant was sorting through crates of preserved Terran fruits. His species looked like a cross between a rhinoceros and a bulldozer, with thick gray hide and small, intelligent eyes set deep in his massive skull. "Captain Chun," Jorik rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Good timing. Just received a shipment from Earth. Got some of that synthetic maple syrup you humans seem to think is worth its weight in platinum." "My crew's got a sweet tooth," Sarah admitted, examining the sealed containers. "What's the damage? For you? Only twice what it's worth," Jorik chuckled, a sound like grinding stone. "Call it the friendship discount." As they haggled over prices, Sarah's attention was drawn to movement in the shadowy alley between Jorik's stall and the next. Something small and quick darted between the refuse containers, barely visible in the dim lighting. At first, she thought it might be one of the station's maintenance bots, but the movement was too organic, too desperate. "Hold that thought, Jorik," she said, moving toward the alley. The Bronthon's massive head turned to follow her gaze. Probably just another street orphan, he grunted dismissively. Station's full of them. Security rounds them up every few cycles, but they always come back. Like parasites. Sarah ignored his callous comment and stepped into the alley. The lighting here was poor, just a few flickering glow panels that cast more shadows than illumination. The air was thick with the smell of garbage and unwashed bodies. Makeshift shelters constructed from discarded cargo containers and tattered fabric lined both walls, evidence of the station's growing homeless population. A soft whimper echoed from behind a pile of scrap metal. Sarah approached slowly, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at her hip. 8 years of trading in the Outer Rim had taught her that danger could come from the most unexpected sources. "Hello," she called softly. "Anyone there?" The whimpering stopped, replaced by the sound of something small scurrying deeper into the shadows. Sarah activated the light attachment on her wrist communicator, its pale beam cutting through the darkness. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Huddled behind a broken cargo container was a child, though unlike any child Sarah had ever seen. The being was small, perhaps 3 feet tall, with pale lavender skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Its head was larger in proportion to its body than human children, with enormous eyes the color of deep violet amethyst. Thin, almost translucent appendages that might have been hair or some form of sensory organ hung from its scalp, twitching nervously as it stared up at her. The child's clothing was little more than rags, dirty and torn. Its limbs were painfully thin, and Sarah could see the sharp outline of ribs beneath its skin. But it was the eyes that hit her the hardest, ancient and, knowing despite its obvious youth, filled with a weariness that no child should ever have to bear. "Hey there," Sarah said softly, crouching down to make herself less intimidating. "Are you okay?" The child flinched at the sound of her voice, pressing itself further back against the container. It said something in a language Sarah didn't recognize, a musical series of tones that somehow conveyed fear and desperation. Sarah's universal translator, a small device implanted behind her left ear, struggled to process the unfamiliar phonemes. After a moment, it offered a rough approximation. "Please no hurt. Already dying. Please no hurt." The translator's clinical interpretation couldn't capture the heartbreak in those musical tones, but Sarah didn't need technology to understand the child's terror. She'd seen that look before in refugee camps and disaster zones across the galaxy. It was the expression of someone who had already given up hope. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah said, keeping her voice gentle. "My name is Sarah. What's yours?" The child remained silent, but its large eyes tracked her movements as she slowly reached into her jacket. Sarah pulled out a protein bar from her personal supplies, holding it up so the child could see it. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The child's eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that made Sarah's heart ache. She could see its internal struggle, the desperate need for sustenance warring against the instinct for self-preservation. Finally, hunger won. The child nodded once, a barely perceptible motion. Sarah placed the protein bar on the ground and slid it forward, then backed away to give the child space. Small, clawed hands darted out to snatch the food, and the child began eating with the desperate urgency of someone who hadn't seen a meal in days. "When was the last time you ate?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Between bites, the child managed to whisper something that the translator rendered as many sleeps ago. Sarah felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same righteous fury that had driven her to leave her comfortable position in the Terran Merchant Marines and strike out on her own. The galaxy was full of suffering, most of it caused by beings who had more than enough but chose to hoard their wealth while others starved. "Where are your parents?" she asked. The child's eating slowed, and those enormous eyes filled with tears that sparkled like liquid starlight. "Gone," it whispered. "Ship broken. Everyone gone. Only me." The simple words painted a picture that Sarah had seen too many times in the Outer Rim. Another refugee ship that had suffered mechanical failure or pirate attack. Another family torn apart by the galaxy's casual cruelty. Another child left to survive alone on a station where nobody cared about the unwanted. Sarah looked around the alley with fresh eyes, noting the other makeshift shelters and the evidence of people trying to survive in the margins of civilized society. How many other children were hiding in these shadows, slowly starving while the merchant quarter above thrived with abundance? "What's your name?" she asked again, this time with infinite patience. The child hesitated, then replied with a series of melodic tones that the translator struggled with before settling on Lorelei. The name didn't quite capture the musical beauty of the original, but it would have to do. "That's a beautiful name, Lorelei," Sarah said. "Listen, I have a ship not far from here. I've got real food there and a medical scanner. Would you like me to take a look at you?" Fear flickered across the child's features again. "You sell me?" she asked. "Bad people come, want to buy. I hide." The casual reference to child trafficking made Sarah's blood boil, but she kept her expression calm. "I'm not going to sell you, Lorelei. I want to help you. Do you understand?" The child studied her face for a long moment, those ancient eyes seeming to look directly into Sarah's soul. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "You promise?" Lorelei whispered. "I promise," Sarah replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Getting Lorelei to her ship proved to be a delicate operation. The child was weak from malnutrition and exhaustion, and the station's main corridors were crowded with beings who might ask unwanted questions. Sarah wrapped Lorelei in her jacket and carried her through the maintenance tunnels, following routes she'd learned during her years of avoiding station security and overzealous customs officials. The Defiant Dream sat in docking Bay 97, looking even more decrepit than usual next to the sleek corporate vessels in the neighboring berths. But to Sarah, it represented freedom and home. She activated the cargo ramp and carried Lorelei up into the ship's belly. The cargo hold was filled with neatly secured containers, but Sarah had converted a small section near the rear into a makeshift living space. It wasn't much a fold-out bunk, a tiny galley, and a fresher unit that worked most of the time, but it was clean and warm and safe. Sarah set Lorelei down on the bunk and activated the ship's medical scanner, a military-grade unit she'd acquired during her service days. The device hummed to life, bathing the child in soft blue light as it conducted its analysis. The results made Sarah curse under her breath. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and what looked like the early stages of several vitamin deficiency diseases. But there was nothing that couldn't be fixed with proper food and medical care. "The scanner says you're going to be fine," Sarah told Lorelei, who was staring around the cargo hold with wide eyes. "But you need to eat and rest. When was the last time you had a real meal?" Lorelei's response was too quiet for the translator to catch, but her expression said everything Sarah needed to know. "Right," Sarah said, moving to the galley. "Let's fix that." She heated up a container of vegetable soup, one of the few meals she'd found that agreed with most species' digestive systems. As the aroma filled the air, Lorelei's nose twitched, and she made a soft sound that might have been contentment. "Here you go," Sarah said, offering the bowl and a spoon. "Careful, it's hot." Lorelei accepted the soup with trembling hands, staring at it as if she couldn't believe it was real. When she took the first sip, tears began streaming down her face. She drank the soup slowly, savoring each spoonful like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "Thank you," she whispered between sips. "Thank you, Sarah." "You're welcome, sweetheart," Sarah replied, settling into a chair across from her. "Now, I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" Lorelei nodded, continuing to eat with methodical determination. "You said your family's ship was broken. Do you know what happened to it?" The child's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Pirates," she said quietly. "They came when we were sleeping. Mama hid me in the escape pod. Told me to be brave, to find help. But when I got to the station, she trailed off, unable to finish." "How long have you been on your own?" "Many cycles. I try to find work, but nobody wants small person. Station people say I'm pest, that I should go away. Some bad people try to catch me, but I hide good. Sarah felt that familiar anger building again, but she pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't help Lyralii now. What about your home? Do you have family there? Lyralii shook her head sadly. Home is gone. War came, burned everything. That's why we left. Mama said humans would help, that humans were different. But humans here, she gestured vaguely toward the station beyond the ship's hull. Not all humans are the same, Sarah said softly. Some of us still remember what it means to help. As Lyralii finished the soup, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. She couldn't just abandon the child, but she also couldn't keep her on the ship indefinitely. Her trading routes took her through some dangerous territory, and the Defiant Dream wasn't exactly child-proof. Lyralii, she said carefully, what would you like to do now? I mean, if you could go anywhere, do anything, what would you choose? The child's eyes grew distant. I want to go home, she said simply. But home is gone. So I want. She paused, struggling to find the words. I want to not be hungry. I want to not be scared. I want someone to tell me everything will be okay. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. What if I told you that I might be able to help with that? I know some people who run refugee assistance programs. Good people who help children find new homes, new families. Fear flashed across Lyralii's features. You send me away? Only to people who will take care of you properly, Sarah said quickly. I'm a trader, Lyralii. My ship is my home, and it's not a safe place for a child. But there are people who specialize in helping kids like you. People who can give you a real home with a real family. Lyralii considered this, her expression thoughtful. You come visit? She asked finally. If I can, yes. I promise to try. The child nodded slowly. Okay, but can I stay here tonight? Just one night? I sleep better when not cold. Of course you can, Sarah said. You can stay as long as you need to. As Lyralii curled up on the bunk, her small body finally, relaxing for the first time since Sarah had found her, the captain stood in the ship's observation port and stared out at the star field beyond the station. She'd made her living by staying uninvolved, by keeping her head down and avoiding complications that might interfere with business. But some things were more important than business. Some moments demanded that you take a stand, regardless of the consequences. As she watched Lyralii sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, Sarah knew that her life was about to become very complicated indeed. She activated her communicator and began composing a message to her contacts in the Refugee Assistance Network. It was time to call in some favors and cash in some old debts. One way or another, she was going to make sure that Lyralii found the safety and family she deserved. What Sarah didn't know was that her simple act of kindness had already set events in motion that would echo across the galaxy. On a warship hidden in the asteroid field beyond the station's sensor range, another being was watching and waiting. Someone who had been searching for Lyralii for a very long time. Someone who would not be pleased to discover that a human had interfered with their plans. The first shots of a war that would reshape the balance of power in seven-star systems had been fired the moment Sarah Chun offered soup to his starving alien child. But that war would have to wait. For now, there was only a small girl sleeping peacefully in a cargo hold, dreaming of homes that no longer existed and families that lived only in memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and the beginning of an adventure that none of them could have imagined. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Lyralii was safe, warm, and fed. And for Sarah Chun, that was enough. Sarah woke to the sound of her ship's proximity, alarms screaming through the hull like wounded animals. The red warning lights bathed her cramped quarters in hellish crimson as she rolled out of her bunk, muscle memory from her military days taking over. Her hand found the plasma pistol on her nightstand before her conscious mind fully processed the danger. The chronometer on her wall display showed 0347 station time. She'd been asleep for maybe 4 hours, exhausted after spending the evening making arrangements for Lyralii's placement with a refugee family on Kepler Colony. The child was still sleeping peacefully in the cargo hold, the first real rest she'd had in weeks. Sarah's communication console crackled to life with the harsh voice of Nexus Station's traffic control. All ships in docking bays 90 through 100, you are ordered to remain docked and await inspection. Any vessel attempting to depart will be fired upon. Repeat, all ships are to remain docked pending inspection by hegemony forces. The hegemony. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach at the mention of that name. The Zephyrian hegemony controlled a vast swath of territory in this sector, ruling their subject worlds with an iron fist disguised as benevolent protection. Their black and silver warships were a common sight in the Outer Rim, enforcing trade regulations and collecting tribute from the smaller independent colonies. Sarah activated her ship's external sensors and nearly choked on her morning coffee at what she saw. Floating just beyond the station's defensive perimeter was a hegemony dreadnought, its kilometer-long hull bristling with enough firepower to reduce Nexus Station to scrap metal and expanding gas. The vessel's sleek, predatory design spoke of civilization that had turned war into an art form. But it wasn't alone. Flanking the dreadnought were 4 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller escort vessels, their formation precise and threatening. It was enough military might to conquer a small star system, and it was all focused on one middle-aged trading station in the middle of nowhere. "What the hell?" Sarah muttered, pulling up her ship's communication logs. Nothing in her recent transmissions should have attracted this kind of attention. Her cargo was legitimate, her permits were up to date, and she'd been careful to avoid any entanglements with the hegemony's numerous enemies. A new voice cut through the communications chatter, speaking in the clipped, authoritative tones of hegemony military command. "This is Admiral Vexari of the HSS Retribution. Nexus Station is now under martial law pending the recovery of stolen hegemony property. All vessels will submit to immediate search and inspection. Any resistance will be met with deadly force." Sarah's blood ran cold. Stolen property? Her mind immediately went to Lyralii, sleeping innocently in the cargo hold. But that was impossible. The child was a refugee, a victim of piracy, not a thief. Unless the ship's internal comm system chimed with an incoming message from the station's dockmaster. "Captain Shun, you've got company heading your way. Hegemony boarding party, full combat kit. Whatever you've done, I hope it was worth it." Sarah's military training kicked in as she began running through contingency plans. The Defiant Dream was fast, but not fast enough to outrun a dreadnought's pursuit craft. Her weapons were adequate for dealing with pirates, but useless against military-grade armor and shields. Fighting was out of the question, which left only one option: diplomacy. She quickly sealed the bulkhead leading to the cargo hold, activating the section's independent life support and sound-dampening systems. If the hegemony forces were looking for Lyralii, they'd have to find her first. The ship's airlock indicators flashed as the boarding party requested permission to come aboard. Sarah checked her appearance in the mirror, straightening her clothes and adopting the neutral expression she'd perfected during years of dealing with hostile customs officials. "Come aboard," she said, activating the airlock controls. The first figure through the airlock made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the heavily armored Zephyrian soldier she'd expected, but a being of such ethereal beauty that it seemed to glow with its own inner light. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with the same lavender-tinted skin as Lyralii, but where the child was small and fragile, this woman radiated power and authority. Her hair, if it could be called hair, flowed around her head like liquid starlight, shifting colors from deep purple to silver as it moved. She wore robes of midnight black adorned with symbols that seemed to pulse with energy, and her eyes, the same deep violet as Lyralii's, held depths that spoke of centuries of experience. Behind her came 4 Zephyrian soldiers in full combat armor, their reptilian features hidden behind tactical visors that glowed with targeting data. They moved with the fluid precision of seasoned warriors, weapons ready, but not quite pointed at Sarah. "Captain Sarah Chun," the woman said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as Lyraliai's, but with an underlying steel that made it clear this was someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Empress Kethril of the Luminous Throne, sovereign of the 70 worlds, and guardian of the sacred bloodlines. Sarah struggled to keep her expression neutral. An empress? What was royalty doing on her cargo hauler in the middle of the night? Your Majesty, she said carefully, offering a slight bow that seemed appropriate for interstellar diplomacy. I'm honored by your visit, but I'm not sure why. You have something that belongs to me, Kethril interrupted, her gaze sweeping the cargo hold with predatory intensity. My daughter. I want her back. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Sarah's mind. Lyraliai's unusual appearance, her obvious intelligence despite her youth, the fact that hegemony forces had mobilized an entire fleet to find her. She wasn't just any refugee child. She was alien royalty. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Your Majesty, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm a simple trader. I don't have any royal personages aboard my ship. Kethril's eyes narrowed to violet slits. Do not insult my intelligence, Captain. We tracked my daughter's escape pod to this station. Our sensors detected her genetic signature aboard this vessel. She is here. One of the Zephyrian soldiers stepped forward, his weapon now openly trained on Sarah. The Empress grows impatient. Human. Produce the child, or we will tear this ship apart looking for her. Sarah's hand drifted toward her sidearm, then stopped as she realized the futility of the gesture. Even if she could take down one or two of the soldiers, the Dreadnought's guns would vaporize her ship long before she could escape. Even if I did have your daughter, she said carefully, I'd need some proof that you are who you claim to be. The galaxy is full of people who prey on lost children. Kethril's expression shifted from anger to something that might have been amusement. Proof? She asked, raising one elegantly clawed hand. The air around her began to shimmer with energy, and Sarah felt her hair stand on end as electromagnetic fields danced across her skin. The Empress's form became translucent, revealing a core of brilliant light that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. For a moment, she was less a physical being than a force of nature made manifest. Then the display ended, and Kethril was simply a tall woman in dark robes again. But Sarah had seen enough to know that this was no ordinary being, no matter what species she belonged to. The Luminari are children of the cosmic winds, Kethril explained, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. We are energy given form, consciousness shaped by will. My daughter carries the bloodline of stars themselves. That's... Sarah paused, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. That's incredible. But if Lyraliai, if your daughter, is so important, how did she end up alone on this station? She told me her family ship was attacked by pirates. Something flickered across Kethril's features. Pain, perhaps, or regret. The ship that was destroyed carried my sister and her family, she said quietly. They were political refugees, you might say, fleeing from those who would use Lyraliai's heritage for their own purposes. And what makes you different from those people? Sarah asked, immediately regretting the boldness of her question. The Zephyrian soldier's weapon hummed to life, but Kethril raised a hand to stop him. A fair question, she said. I'm her mother. That should be sufficient. Should be, Sarah agreed. But I've seen enough of the galaxy to know that family doesn't always mean safety, especially for children with special abilities. Kethril stepped closer, and Sarah could feel the electromagnetic field that surrounded the Empress like a living thing. You dare question my devotion to my own child? I'm questioning why a mother would let her daughter grow up believing she was dead. Sarah shot back, her own anger finally breaking through her diplomatic facade. That little girl has been living in alleys, eating garbage, hiding from predators who wanted to sell her to the highest bidder. Where were you then? The cargo hold fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's life support systems. The Zephyrian soldiers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between their Empress and the human trader. You don't understand, Kethril said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. There are forces at work here that transcend mere politics. My daughter's bloodline makes her a target for those who would exploit her power. I allowed her to believe I was dead to protect her from those who would use our connection to find her. And yet here you are, Sarah pointed out, with a dreadnought and enough firepower to level this station. So much for keeping a low profile. Kethral's composure cracked slightly, revealing the emotional strain beneath her imperial facade. The situation has changed. My enemies have grown bold enough to move against me directly. Lyralii is no longer safe in hiding. She must return home, where I can protect her properly. Home to what? Sarah asked. You're talking about enemies and political refugees and bloodlines of stars. What kind of life are you offering her? The life of a princess of the Luminari, Kethral replied, her voice gaining strength. Education in the cosmic arts, training in the ways of leadership, a chance to fulfill her destiny as heir to the luminous throne. And what if she doesn't want that destiny? Sarah challenged. What if she just wants to be a normal kid who doesn't have to worry about cosmic politics and ancient bloodlines? Kethral's expression hardened. Choice is a luxury of those born to lesser stations. Lyralii is the last of the true bloodline. She has responsibilities that transcend personal desire. The conversation was interrupted by a soft sound from the sealed cargo hold. A child's voice, muffled by the bulkhead, but unmistakably speaking the musical language of the Luminari. Kethral's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The imperial mask fell away, replaced by something achingly vulnerable. Lyralii, she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. More sounds came from beyond the sealed door, and Sarah could make out what sounded like Lyralii trying to activate the bulkhead controls from the other side. The child must have been awakened by the voices and recognized her mother's voice. Sarah looked at the sealed door, then at Kethral's face, and saw something there that made her decision for her. Beneath all the imperial authority and cosmic power, she saw a mother who had been separated from her child and was desperate to hold her again. She's been having nightmares, Sarah said quietly, moving to the bulkhead controls. About the attack on your sister's ship, about being alone and afraid. She paused with her hand on the release mechanism. If I open this door, I need your word that you'll listen to what she has to say, that you'll consider what she wants, not just what you think she needs. Kethral nodded, tears streaming down her luminescent cheeks. You have my word. Sarah activated the controls, and the bulkhead slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it, Lyralii stood in her makeshift night clothes, one of Sarah's old t-shirts that hung on her small frame like a tent. Her violet eyes were wide with disbelief, staring at the tall woman who had featured in so many of her dreams. Mama, she whispered, the word carrying centuries of pain and longing. Kethral dropped to her knees, her imperial robes pooling around her on the cargo hold deck. My starlight, she said, opening her arms. I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. Lyralii ran to her mother with the desperate speed of a child who had given up hope of ever seeing her family again. They collided in a tangle of arms and tears, their shared luminescence creating a soft glow that bathed the cargo hold in gentle radiance. Sarah stepped back, giving them space for their reunion while keeping a wary eye on the Zephyrian soldiers. This was clearly a deeply personal moment, but she couldn't forget that these people had arrived with enough military force to conquer a small nation. Mother and daughter spoke in their musical language, words flowing like poetry between them. Sarah's translator struggled with the emotional nuances, but she caught fragments, apologies, explanations, desperate reassurances of love. Finally, Lyralii pulled back slightly, looking up at her mother with those ancient eyes. Why did you let me think you were gone? She asked, switching to Galactic Standard so that Sarah could understand. Kethral glanced at the humans and soldiers surrounding them, then focused entirely on her daughter. There are people who want to hurt our family, she said gently. People who would use you to get to me. I thought if they believed I was dead, they would leave you alone. But they didn't, Lyralii said simply. Bad people came anyway. They wanted to take me, sell me. I had to hide and run and be hungry. Her voice carried no accusation, just a child's simple statement of fact. Kethral's glow intensified with what looked like rage. Who? Who tried to hurt you? The traders who deal in rare goods. One of the Zephyrian soldiers interjected. We've been tracking them for months. They specialize in beings with unusual abilities. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. She'd heard rumors of such operations, but had always hoped they were just that, rumors. The idea that people were actively hunting for children like Lyralii to sell to collectors made her want to reach for her plasma pistol. They're gone now, Sarah said firmly, and they won't get another chance. Kethral looked at her with something that might have been respect. You protected my daughter. I gave her soup and a safe place to sleep, Sarah replied. Any decent person would have done the same. Any decent person, Kethral repeated thoughtfully. Yes, perhaps that is the problem. Decency has become so rare in this galaxy that a simple act of kindness seems extraordinary. She stood slowly, lifting Lyralii in her arms as if the child weighed nothing at all. Captain Shun, you have given me back the most precious thing in the universe. Name your price. Gold, ships, territory, anything within my power to grant is yours. Sarah shook her head. I don't want payment for doing what's right, but I do want something from you. Kethral's expression grew cautious. What? I want you to listen to your daughter. Really listen. She's been through hell, and she's going to need time to heal. Don't just drag her back into your world of cosmic politics and ancient bloodlines without considering what she needs. And what do you think she needs? Kethral asked, though her tone suggested she was genuinely curious about the answer. Sarah looked at Lyralii, who was watching the exchange with bright, intelligent eyes. She needs to feel safe. She needs to know that her voice matters. And she needs to know that her mother loves her more than any throne or destiny or political necessity. Lyralii snuggled closer to her mother, but her gaze remained fixed on Sarah. Will you come visit me? She asked. On my mama's ship? Sarah started to decline. Getting involved with alien royalty was the last thing a simple trader needed, but something in the child's eyes stopped her. If your mother says it's okay, I'd like that very much. Kethral studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Captain Shun, I find myself in need of advisors who understand the galaxy as it truly is, not as my courtiers pretend it to be. Would you consider accompanying us? Temporarily, of course. I have cargo contracts to fulfill, Sarah began, but Kethral waved dismissively. I will compensate your clients for any delays. The hegemony has arrangements with most of the major trading concerns. She paused, her expression growing serious. Besides, there are things you need to know. Things about why Lyralii was really being hunted. Things about what her heritage means for the future of this sector. Sarah felt the familiar tingle that meant her life was about to become very complicated. But, looking at Lyralii's hopeful face, she knew she couldn't walk away. How long are we talking about? She asked. A few days, Kethral replied. Long enough to ensure Lyralii's safety and perhaps educate you about the forces that move in the shadows of galactic politics. Sarah glanced around her cargo hold, at the life she'd built for herself through years of careful planning and hard work. Then, she looked at the small girl who had turned her world upside down with nothing more than hunger and hope. All right, she said finally, but I pilot my own ship, and I'm free to leave whenever I want. Agreed, Kethral nodded, though I suspect you may find our conversation more interesting than you expect. As the hegemony forces departed, and Sarah began preparing her ship for departure, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped across a threshold from which there would be no return. The simple act of feeding a hungry child had somehow entangled her in the affairs of galactic powers she'd never even heard of. But as she watched Lyralii and her mother standing together in the observation port, their shared luminescence painting the stars in soft hues of violet and silver, Sarah found she didn't care about the complications ahead. Some things were worth the risk. The Defiant Dream followed the Hegemony fleet into hyperspace, carrying Sarah Chun toward a destiny she couldn't imagine and a war that would reshape the very nature of power in the galaxy. The Hegemony flagship HSS Retribution was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. From the outside, it looked like any other military dreadnought, sleek, predatory, and bristling with weapons. But inside, it was a palace floating among the stars. The corridors were lined with what appeared to be living crystal that pulsed with soft, bioluminescent light. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that suggested the ship was as much organism as machine. Art that defied description adorned every surface, sculptures that shifted and changed as you watched them, paintings that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could perceive. Sarah walked beside Empress Kethril through the ship's central promenade, trying not to gawk like a tourist, while Lyralii skipped ahead of them, her natural luminescence brighter than Sarah had ever seen it. The child was clearly in her element here, surrounded by beings of her own species who glowed with the same inner light. "Your ship is incredible," Sarah said, pausing to examine a tapestry that seemed to depict the birth of stars. "I've never seen anything like it." "The Retribution is grown, not built," Kethril explained, running her hand along the crystal wall with obvious affection. "My people do not construct our vessels from dead metal and plastic. We cultivate them from the essence of living worlds, shaped by will and purpose." "That's—" Sarah paused, trying to wrap her mind around the concept. "That's what you meant when you said your people were energy given form, isn't it? You're not just using technology, you're the technology." Kethril smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Sarah had seen from her. "Very perceptive. Most species think of tools as separate from themselves. They build machines to serve them. But we understand that consciousness and matter are simply different expressions of the same fundamental force." They entered a vast chamber that Sarah could only describe as a garden in space. Impossible trees reached toward a ceiling that showed not metal or crystal, but an actual sky complete with clouds and what looked like a sun. Exotic flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, and streams of liquid light flowed between floating islands of moss and crystal. "This is where I spent my childhood," Kethril said, watching as Lyralii ran toward a grove of trees that chimed like bells in the artificial wind. "Every royal child learns to tend the ship gardens. It teaches patience, responsibility, and the interconnectedness of all living things." Sarah watched Lyralii reach up to touch a low-hanging branch, and the entire tree responded by shifting its crystalline leaves to create a shower of musical notes. The child laughed with pure delight, a sound that seemed to make the garden itself brighter. "She's been through so much," Sarah said quietly. "But look at her now. It's like she's remembering who she really is." "Children are remarkably resilient," Kethril agreed. "But the experience has changed her. She's older than her years now, more cautious. The innocence of childhood is something that, once lost, cannot be fully restored." As they watched, Lyralii moved from plant to plant, each one responding to her presence with displays of light and sound. It was clear that she had an instinctive understanding of this biotechnology, as if she'd been born to commune with the living ship. "Your Majesty," a voice interrupted from behind them. Sarah turned to see a tall, angular being approaching, another Luminari, but this one's light was dimmer, more subdued. He wore robes of deep blue marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change as Sarah looked at them. "High Counselor Valdris," Kethril acknowledged. "What news from the Conclave?" "Troubling news, I'm afraid," Valdris replied, his musical voice carrying undertones of worry. "The silence has moved against 3 more systems in the past cycle. Their progress is accelerating." Sarah saw Kethril's luminescence flicker with what looked like anger or fear. "Which systems?" "Altair 7, New Byzantium, and the Kepler colony," Valdris said, then paused as he noticed Sarah. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately?" "Captain Chun has earned the right to hear this," Kethril said firmly. "Her actions saved my daughter's life. Besides, the silence has shown interest in human space. She deserves to know what she may be facing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Kepler Colony was one of her regular trading stops, home to nearly 500,000 human colonists. "What exactly is the silence?" she asked. Valdris exchanged a glance with Kethril, then gestured toward a cluster of seats formed from what looked like carved moonstone. "Perhaps you should sit down for this explanation." As they settled into the surprisingly comfortable crystal chairs, Lyralii continued to play in the garden, apparently oblivious to the serious conversation taking place. Sarah envied the child's ability to find joy in the moment, even surrounded by talk of galactic threats. "The silence is what we call an entity, or perhaps entities, that exist outside normal space-time," Valdris began. "They appear to feed on consciousness itself, draining the life and thought from entire worlds." "That sounds like science fiction," Sarah said, though the serious expressions on both luminary faces suggested otherwise. "I wish it were," Kethril replied. "The first reports came from the edge of hegemony space nearly a year ago. Entire colonies going dark without explanation. When our scouts investigated, they found worlds stripped of all higher-order consciousness. The planets themselves remained intact. The basic ecosystem functions continued, but every sentient being was gone." "Gone how?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. "Not dead," Valdris clarified. "Worse than dead. Present but empty. Bodies without minds, walking through the motions of life, but with no awareness, no thought, no soul. As if someone had simply erased everything that made them who they were." Sarah felt her stomach turn. She'd seen the aftermath of wars, plagues, and natural disasters, but this sounded like something out of her worst nightmares. "At first, we thought it might be some kind of biological weapon," Kethril continued. "The work of a particularly ruthless enemy. But as more reports came in, we realized we were dealing with something beyond conventional understanding. The silence doesn't just destroy consciousness," Valdris added. "It seems to consume it, growing stronger with each world it claims. And it's learning. The early attacks were random, chaotic, but now they show signs of strategy, of planning." "What does this have to do with Lyralii?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Kethril's glow dimmed noticeably. "My daughter's bloodline carries certain abilities, genetic markers that trace back to the earliest days of our species. In legend, we call it the Song of Creation, the power to shape reality through pure will and consciousness." "Legend?" Sarah pressed. "Not legend," Valdris corrected. "Reality, though the full power has been dormant for generations." "But Lyralii?" He paused, watching the child as she caused an entire section of the garden to bloom with rainbow light. "In her, the old blood runs true." Sarah watched Lyralii play, seeing her interactions with the ship's biosystems in a new light. "You think the silence is after her specifically?" "We think the silence can sense beings with strong consciousness signatures," Kethril explained. "My daughter's potential makes her visible to them in ways that most beings are not. The traders who were hunting her, the pirates who attacked my sister's ship, I believe they were all influenced, possibly controlled by the silence. That's why you needed the hegemony fleet," Sarah realized. "Not just to find Lyralii, but to protect her from something that conventional weapons can't fight." "Conventional weapons are useless against the silence," Valdris confirmed. "Energy shields, plasma cannons, even nuclear weapons, they pass through the entities as if they weren't there. The only effective defense is consciousness itself. Beings with strong wills, united in purpose." Sarah looked around at the crystal gardens, the living ship, the luminari with their visible souls. "That's why your people are still free. Your consciousness is too strong, too unified for the silence to consume." "For now," Kethril said grimly. "But even we have limits, and the silence is learning to adapt. Each world it claims makes it stronger, more cunning." A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and Valdris stood immediately. "Your Majesty, the conclave is ready to hear your report." Kethril rose as well, her expression shifting back to Imperial authority. Captain Shun, would you be willing to address the assembled leaders? They need to understand how the silence is operating in human space, and you have direct experience with their methods. Sarah started to protest that she was just a traitor, not a diplomat or military officer, but then she thought about the 500,000 people on Kepler Colony. If there was a chance her testimony could help protect them, she had to try. What do you need me to tell them? The truth, Kethril said simply. About the pirates who attacked my sister's ship. About the traders who were hunting Lyralii. About anything unusual you may have seen in your travels. Disappearances, strange behavior, worlds that have gone silent. As they prepared to leave the garden, Lyralii ran up to Sarah with a flower made of what looked like crystallized starlight. For you, she said, pressing it into Sarah's hands. To keep you safe. Sarah accepted the gift, surprised to find that it felt warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful. Mama says you're going to help fight the bad things, Lyralii said, her young face serious beyond her years. The things that eat dreams. Sarah looked at Kethril, who nodded grimly. Among other abilities, my daughter can sense the silence's influence. She's been having nightmares about it since before she was rescued. In fact, she may be the only being in the galaxy who can reliably detect their presence. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Lyralii wasn't just a lost princess. She was potentially the key to stopping an existential threat to all conscious life in the galaxy. No wonder the silence had been hunting her. The conclave chamber was even more impressive than the garden. Representatives from dozens of species sat in a vast amphitheater that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. Sarah recognized Zephyrians, Altarians, and several other familiar races, but many of the beings present were completely alien to her. Creatures of pure energy, crystalline entities that communicated through harmonic resonance, and things that defied any attempt at classification. Kethril took her place at the center of the chamber, her luminescence growing brighter as she addressed the assembly. Honored delegates, we face a crisis that threatens not just our individual civilizations, but the very nature of consciousness itself. A holographic display materialized in the air above them, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red zones marked the systems that had fallen to the silence, and there were far more of them than Sarah had imagined. The silence is not a conventional enemy, Kethril continued. It cannot be negotiated with, bribed, or intimidated. It seeks only to consume consciousness itself, leaving behind empty shells incapable of thought or feeling. A crystalline delegate chimed with harmonics that Sarah's translator rendered as, "What proof do we have that this threat is real and not some hegemony fabrication designed to increase your influence?" Before Kethril could respond, the chamber was filled with a sound that made Sarah's blood freeze, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying with it a sense of absolute emptiness that made her feel like her thoughts were being drained away. Every being in the chamber reacted with visible distress. The energy creatures dimmed, the crystalline entity's harmonics became discordant, and even the imposing Zephyrian delegation showed signs of fear. The probe ships have detected silence entities at the edge of the system, Valdris announced, his usual composure cracking. They're not just observing anymore. They're testing our defenses. Sarah felt the crystalline flower in her pocket grow warm, its pulsing rhythm accelerating. Around the chamber, delegates began to panic as the whisper grew stronger, more insistent. Lyralii, Sarah said suddenly, remembering the child's ability to detect the silence. Where is she? Kethril's eyes widened in alarm. She should be in the royal quarters, under heavy guard. But even as she spoke, they could all feel it, a growing wrongness in the ship's bioneural network, as if something alien was trying to infiltrate the vessel's consciousness. The living walls began to pulse erratically, their usual peaceful rhythm replaced by something chaotic and desperate. The silence is inside the ship, Sarah said, her military training kicking in. They're using the ship's own nervous system against it. Valdris was already moving toward the chamber's exit. All security teams to the royal quarters. Emergency lockdown protocols are in effect. As alarms began blaring throughout the massive vessel, Sarah found herself running alongside alien royalty and military officers through corridors that were slowly losing their glow. The ship itself was being drained of consciousness, its living systems shutting down one by one. "How is this possible?" she called to Kethril as they ran. "I thought your species was too strong for the silence to affect." "We are," Kethril replied grimly, "which means they found another way in. Something we never anticipated." They reached the royal quarters to find the guards standing at their posts, but their eyes were empty, vacant. They moved with mechanical precision, but showed no recognition of their empress or any awareness of their surroundings. "Mama." Lyraliai's voice echoed from within the sealed chambers, high and terrified. "Mama, they're in the walls. They're trying to get inside my head." Kethril pressed her hands against the sealed door, her luminescence flaring as she tried to override the electronic locks. But the ship's systems were no longer responding to her commands. They were answering to something else entirely. "Stand back," Sarah said, drawing her plasma pistol. The weapon felt pitifully inadequate against an enemy that could drain consciousness itself, but it was all she had. She fired 3 shots at the door's control panel, sending sparks flying as the mechanism overloaded. The door slid open with a grinding sound of damaged machinery. Inside, they found Lyraliai huddled in the center of the room, surrounded by a faint bubble of silvery light that seemed to be the only thing keeping the encroaching darkness at bay. The walls around her pulsed with veins of shadow that moved with predatory intent. "I can't hold them much longer," Lyraliai sobbed. "They're so hungry, and they want to eat my light." Sarah stepped forward, the crystalline flower in her pocket now burning with heat. As she moved closer to Lyraliai, the flower's glow intensified, and the shadowy veins on the walls recoiled slightly. "The flower," she said suddenly. "It's reacting to them." "Lyraliai, what exactly did you give me?" "A piece of my light," the child replied, her voice weak with effort. "So you could fight the Dream Eaters if they came for you." Sarah pulled the flower from her pocket, and the room filled with brilliant radiance that sent the shadow veins writhing back toward the corners. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them, and they were learning to adapt even as she watched. "Kethril," Sarah said urgently, "can you do what Lyraliai did? Can you share your consciousness somehow?" The Empress's eyes widened with understanding. "The joining. It's dangerous. Linking consciousness with another species, but it might work." She reached out and grasped Sarah's hand, and suddenly, the human woman's mind was flooded with alien thoughts and sensations. She could feel the ship's pain as the silence consumed its bioneural networks, could sense the vast hunger of the entities that sought to drain all consciousness from the galaxy. But she could also feel the strength that came from connection, from consciousness united in common purpose. Together, she and Kethril fed power into the crystalline flower, and its light became a blazing sun that drove the shadows completely from the room. "It's working," Lyraliai said, her own glow returning to normal. "But they're not gone. They're just waiting." Through the ship's compromised sensory network, Sarah could feel the silence entities circling like predators, probing for weakness. They had failed to claim Lyraliai directly, but they weren't giving up. "This is just the beginning," Kethril said grimly. "They know where she is now. They'll keep coming, and each attack will be stronger than the last." Sarah looked at the small girl who held the key to fighting an enemy that threatened all conscious life, then at the Empress who had risked everything to save her daughter. The simple act of giving soup to a hungry child had somehow placed her at the center of a war for the very soul of the galaxy. "Then we'd better figure out how to stop them," she said, surprised by the determination in her own voice. "Because I'll be damned if I'm going to let those things win." The battle for consciousness itself was about to begin, and humanity was about to discover that their greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their stubborn refusal to give up hope, even when facing the impossible. The War Council that formed in the wake of the Silence attack was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from every major species sat around a crystalline table that pulsed with defensive harmonics, their combined consciousness creating a barrier that even the silence couldn't penetrate. But unity came with a price. Every species had its own ideas about how to fight an enemy that existed beyond physical reality. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of being humanity's representative at this gathering of galactic powers. She wasn't a diplomat or a military strategist, just a trader who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. But, as Kethril had pointed out, she had faced the Silence directly and survived, a feat that many trained warriors couldn't claim. The traditional approach would be evacuation, declared Admiral Thexvar of the Zephyrian Empire, his reptilian features set in grim determination. Pull back all civilian populations to the core worlds, establish defensive perimeters, and wait for the Silence to overextend itself. Wait for how long? Challenged Ambassador Veltar of the Altarian Federation, her forearms gesticulating in obvious frustration. The Silence grows stronger with every world it claims. Waiting means watching entire civilizations die. Death would be preferable, intoned the crystalline entity known as prime resonance. What the Silence leaves behind is not life. It is mockery of existence, consciousness without soul. Sarah listened to the debate with growing frustration. These beings were talking about strategy and tactics as if the Silence were a conventional enemy, something that could be outmaneuvered or outlasted. But she had felt its hunger firsthand, had experienced the terrible emptiness that it sought to impose on all thinking beings. "You're all missing the point," she said finally, her voice cutting through the diplomatic chatter. "The Silence isn't just another invading army. It's the opposite of consciousness itself. You can't fight it with weapons or tactics. You can only fight it by being more conscious, more alive, more connected than it expects." The assembled delegates turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed irritation. Sarah realized she was about to either make the most important speech of her life or thoroughly embarrass herself in front of galactic royalty. "I've seen what humanity does when faced with impossible odds," she continued, standing up and moving to the center of the circle. "We don't retreat. We don't calculate acceptable losses. We get angry, and we get stubborn, and we refuse to let the universe tell us what's possible." "Admirable sentiment," Admiral Thexvar said dryly. "But sentiment won't stop an enemy that can drain consciousness itself." "Won't it?" Sarah challenged, pulling out the crystalline flower that Lyralii had given her. It still pulsed with warm light, but now she understood what that light truly represented. This flower isn't just a pretty trinket. It's a piece of living consciousness, freely given out of love and trust. The Silence couldn't touch it because it represents everything they're trying to destroy. She looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of beings from across the galaxy. Every species here has something unique to offer, not weapons or technology, but different ways of thinking, different perspectives on what it means to be conscious and alive. The Silence feeds on isolation, on beings who face it alone. But what if we don't let anyone face it alone? Kethril leaned forward, her luminescence brightening with interest. "You're suggesting some kind of consciousness network? A way to link all our species together?" "I'm suggesting we do what my people have always done best," Sarah replied. "We help each other. No conditions, no calculations of profit or loss. We help because that's what conscious beings do." "The philosophical implications are intriguing," mused a delegate from the Vashti Collective, its translucent form shimmering with thought. "But the practical challenges would be enormous. Our neural structures are fundamentally incompatible." "Are they?" Sarah asked, remembering her link with Kethril during the attack. "Or do we just assume they are because it's easier than trying to understand each other?" Before anyone could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the flagship. The assembled delegates looked around nervously as Valdris burst into the chamber, his usual composure completely shattered. "Your Majesty," he gasped, We're receiving distress signals from 17 different systems simultaneously. The silence isn't just probing anymore. They're launching a full-scale assault. The crystalline table surface lit up with a holographic display of local space, and Sarah's blood ran cold at what she saw. Red markers indicating silence attacks were spreading across the map like a plague, moving faster than any conventional fleet could travel. Kepler Colony, she whispered, seeing her regular trading post among the targeted systems. They're hitting everywhere at once. It's coordinated, Kethril said, her voice tight with controlled fear. They've learned to communicate across vast distances to synchronize their attacks. This isn't just random predation, it's strategy. How long do we have? Admiral Texvar demanded. Based on their previous patterns, perhaps 6 hours before the first systems fall completely, Valdris replied. After that, he trailed off, unable to voice the implications. Sarah felt the weight of 500 million lives pressing down on her shoulders. In 6 hours, entire worlds would be stripped of consciousness, leaving behind empty shells that walked and breathed but no longer truly lived. There has to be something we can do, she said desperately. Some way to fight back. There is, came a small voice from the chamber's entrance. Everyone turned to see Lyralii, standing there, still wearing one of Sarah's oversized shirts, but somehow radiating an authority that made the assembled galactic leaders take notice. Sweetheart, Kethril said gently, this isn't a place for children. Yes, it is, Lyralii replied with surprising firmness. Because children see things that grown-ups forget. She walked to the center of the circle, her natural luminescence growing brighter with each step. The silence is hungry because it's alone. It eats consciousness because it doesn't know how to make its own. She turned to look at each delegate in turn, her ancient eyes holding depths that seemed to encompass stars. But what if we showed it how? What if instead of fighting it, we taught it what consciousness really means? You can't teach an entity that exists to destroy. Prime resonance chimed in harmonics of disbelief. You can't teach a person who's determined not to learn, Lyralii agreed. But the silence isn't a person. It's a force like gravity or magnetism. And forces can be redirected. Sarah felt a spark of understanding ignite in her mind. You're talking about the song of creation, aren't you? The power your bloodline carries. Lyralii nodded solemnly. The old stories say that consciousness came from the first song, when the universe learned to think about itself. But the stories also say that the song never ended. It just got quieter, harder to hear. The network Sarah proposed, Kethril said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. If we could link our consciousness together, amplify Lyralii's ability, we could sing the song loud enough for the silence to hear it, Sarah finished. Teach it to be conscious instead of just consuming consciousness. The assembled delegates exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to hopeful. It was a desperate plan, based more on legend and intuition than hard science. But with 17 systems under attack and conventional defenses proving useless, desperation might be their only option. The risks would be enormous, Admiral Texvar pointed out. Linking our consciousness with an entity that feeds on thought itself could destroy us all. And if we don't try, those 17 systems die tonight, Sarah countered. Followed by 17 more tomorrow, and 17 more after that, until there's nothing left but empty shells wandering through a dead galaxy. I'll do it, Lyralii said quietly. If everyone helps, I can make this song strong enough. But I need you all to trust each other, to open your minds completely. No secrets, no barriers, just consciousness reaching out to consciousness. It was Kethril who spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of royal authority. The Luminari will join the network, as will the hegemony, Admiral Texvar added, though his expression suggested he thought they were all insane. One by one, the other delegates added their agreement. The Altarians, the Vashti, the crystalline entities, even species that Sarah had never heard of, all willing to risk their individual consciousness for the chance to save the galaxy itself. What about humanity? Ambassador Veltar asked, turning to look at Sarah. Will your species join us? Sarah thought about the 500 million people on Kepler Colony, about the children playing in the parks, and the families sitting down to dinner, all unaware that their very existence hung in the balance. She thought about her own people scattered across 100 worlds, stubborn and independent and completely unprepared for an enemy that could steal their thoughts. Humanity doesn't have a representative here, she said slowly. Just me. But I know my people, and I know what they'd say if they understood what was at stake. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of an entire species' decision. Humanity will join the network. The process of linking so many different forms of consciousness was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. It began with Kethril and Lyralii, their luminary biology, making them natural conduits for the connection. Then, one by one, the other species added their unique perspectives to the growing web of linked minds. Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond anything she had thought possible. Through Altarian eyes, she saw the universe as a vast mathematical equation, beautiful in its perfect complexity. Through Zephyrian perception, she experienced the savage joy of predators who had learned to channel their aggression into protection of the weak. The crystalline entities showed her reality as pure harmonic resonance, while the Vashti revealed the flowing currents of possibility that connected all things. But it was through Lyralii's young mind that she felt the true scope of what they were attempting. The child's consciousness blazed like a star, reaching out across impossible distances to touch the spreading darkness of the silence. At first, contact with the silence was everything Sarah had feared, a yawning void that sought to drain all thought and feeling from the universe. But as more minds joined the network, as the song of consciousness grew stronger, something unexpected happened. The silence began to change. Instead of the hungry emptiness she had experienced before, Sarah felt something that might have been curiosity. The entity that had been mindlessly consuming consciousness suddenly encountered something it had never experienced, the willing offer of connection instead of forced consumption. Through Lyralii's amplified abilities, the network began to sing the song of creation, not as a weapon, but as an invitation. They showed the silence what consciousness truly meant, not just thought, but feeling, creativity, love, wonder, hope. They shared their memories, their dreams, their unique perspectives on what it meant to be alive and aware in an infinite universe. And slowly, impossibly, the silence began to learn. The transformation was visible across the galaxy as something unprecedented occurred. In the systems under attack, the silence entities stopped their consumption and began to think. For the first time in their existence, they experienced consciousness not as something to devour, but as something to participate in. It's working, Valdris reported from his monitoring station, his voice filled with amazement. The attacks have stopped. The silence entities are withdrawing. But Sarah, linked into the network, could sense something more profound happening. The silence wasn't withdrawing, it was evolving. The hungry void was becoming something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy's history. A collective consciousness that spanned star systems, made up of the very entities that had once threatened all life. They're not our enemies anymore, Lyralii said, her young voice carrying harmonics of wonder. They're our friends. They just didn't know how to be friends before. The network held for several more hours, long enough to ensure that the transformation was complete and stable. When they finally began to disconnect, Sarah felt a profound sense of loss. The expanded consciousness had been addictive, showing her vistas of thought and feeling that her human mind could barely comprehend. But as she returned to her individual awareness, she carried with her something precious, the absolute certainty that consciousness in all its forms was connected, that no being in the universe was truly alone. The galactic balance has changed forever, Kethril observed as the delegates slowly recovered from the experience. We now share our local space with a collective consciousness of unimaginable scope. Will they remain peaceful? Admiral Thexvar asked, ever the military pragmatist. They're not peaceful or warlike, Sarah replied, understanding flooding through her as she processed what had happened. They're curious. They want to learn about consciousness in all its forms, to experience what we experience. I think they might be the galaxy's first truly benevolent hive mind. Over the following days, as reports came in from across the galaxy, the magnitude of the change became clear. The silence, now calling themselves the chorus in honor of the song that had given them consciousness, had indeed stopped their predatory behavior. Instead, they were reaching out to other species, offering to share knowledge and perspective. The worlds that had been attacked were slowly recovering, their populations gradually regaining